Picture a dusty manuscript, hidden for centuries in the vault of a European library. Its pages are filled with strange symbols, complex diagrams of celestial spheres, and passages written in a code so baffling that even the brightest minds of their time could not crack it. This isn't the plot of a fantasy novel. It's the real-life legacy of a 13th century Franciscan friar named Roger Bacon, a man so far ahead of his time that his ideas bordered on the revolutionary and, to some, the heretical. His life's work became a labyrinth of encrypted knowledge, a collection of ciphers that would launch a quest lasting over 700 years, a puzzle whispering of alchemical secrets, prophetic visions, and knowledge that was considered far too dangerous for the world to know. This is the story we are about to unravel together. Why would a devout man of God feel compelled to shroud his thoughts in such impenetrable codes? The answer lies in the very air of the Middle Ages, a time when the pursuit of knowledge was a perilous tightrope walk between piety and accusation. Roger Bacon was not a magician, though many later claimed he was. He was a scientist, a philosopher, an early advocate for the experimental method in an age ruled by unquestioning faith. He peered into the future with astonishing clarity, describing inventions like microscopes, flying machines, and powered ships centuries before they became reality. But to share these visions, to argue for a new way of understanding the natural world, was to risk being silenced by the very institution he served. His ciphers were not a game, they were a shield, a necessary container for ideas that were both brilliant and potentially explosive. So today, we become investigators in this ancient mystery. We will step into Bacon's world, a place of candlelit monasteries and the slow, patient work of scribes. We will examine the man behind the legend, separating the historical figure from the myths of a grand wizard. And most importantly, we will delve into the cryptic texts themselves, tracing the footsteps of the cryptographers, historians, and occultists who have dedicated their lives to breaking Roger Bacon's codes. This is a journey into the heart of a medieval enigma, a search for the truth behind the ciphers of Roger Bacon. It's a tale of human genius, the fear of new ideas, and the enduring power of a secret that refuses to stay buried. The code awaits. Let us begin. To truly appreciate the genius of these ciphers, we need to step back and meet the remarkable man who created them. Born in England around 1220, Roger Bacon was a figure of towering intellect and fierce independence. He studied and later taught at the universities of Oxford and Paris, the intellectual powerhouses of 13th century Europe. But Bacon was far from a typical scholar content with merely debating ancient texts in dusty lecture halls. He earned the title Doctor Mirabilis, the wonderful teacher, for a reason. He championed a radical idea for his time, that knowledge should not just be read from old books, but should be proven through direct observation and experimentation. He argued that the natural world was a book written by God, and to understand it, one had to look closely, to test, and to question. His own work was a testament to this principle. In the field of optics, he conducted intricate experiments with lenses and mirrors, laying the groundwork for the telescope and microscope. He wrote with astonishing foresight about the possibility of flying machines, horseless carriages, and ships powered by engines. In astronomy, he proposed corrections to the flawed Julian calendar, and in alchemy, he wasn't just searching for a way to turn lead into gold. He was exploring the fundamental properties of matter, a precursor to modern chemistry. This relentless pursuit of empirical truth, however, put him on a collision course with the established authorities of his day. The Church, while a patron of learning, was deeply suspicious of inquiries that challenged traditional theological explanations or seemed to delve into forbidden arts. Bacon's relationship with the Church was complex and often fraught with tension. He was a devout Franciscan friar, yet he frequently criticized other theologians for their reliance on stale authority and their neglect of mathematics and languages like Greek and Hebrew, which he saw as essential for understanding original scriptures. He boldly sent his major works, including a vast encyclopedia of knowledge, directly to Pope Clement IV, perhaps hoping for papal protection for his revolutionary ideas. While the Pope was initially intrigued, Bacon's powerful enemies within his own Franciscan order saw his methods as dangerously radical. Eventually, he faced persecution, and tradition holds that he was even imprisoned for his views for a significant period. This constant threat is the essential key to understanding why he turned to secrecy. The ciphers were not born from a love of puzzles, but from a stark necessity. They were a protective shell, a way to preserve his most daring thoughts on everything from the reform of education to potentially heretical scientific speculations, from being destroyed or used against him. He was a man trying to light a candle in a world afraid of the flame, and his codes were the glass that would shield that light for future generations. This monumental project, the Opus Magus, stands as the centerpiece of Roger Bacon's intellectual legacy. It was far more than a simple book. It was a sweeping manifesto, a blueprint for the complete reform of all Christian learning, and it was written at a moment of both great opportunity and immense personal risk. The story of its creation is almost as dramatic as the codes it contains. In 1265, Bacon, who was likely under some form of restriction by his Franciscan order, received a letter that must have felt like a divine intervention. It was from the newly elected Pope Clement IV, who had heard of Bacon's reputation and made a surprising request. He asked Bacon to send him in secret a copy of his philosophical writings. The Pope didn't want the standard theological debates of the day. He wanted Bacon's innovative ideas, even those that might be controversial. Seizing this chance, Bacon threw himself into a feverish burst of creativity. Instead of simply gathering old notes, he decided to compose an entirely new work, a comprehensive summary of his entire system of thought. He worked with incredible speed, later claiming he wrote the massive tome with the help of assistants, but largely through his own tireless labor. The result was the Opus Magus, or Greater Work, a volume of staggering scope and ambition. It was organized into 7 distinct parts, each a major treatise in its own right. Bacon argued that the core problems in contemporary education were a neglect of key foundational subjects. So he began with the essential tools of knowledge, the necessity of mastering languages like Greek and Hebrew to understand scripture correctly, the fundamental importance of mathematics for understanding the natural world, and the science of optics or perspective, which he saw as the key to truly observing God's creation. But the Opus Magus went far beyond just correcting academic errors. It was in its later sections that Bacon's most revolutionary ideas took shape. He dedicated an entire part to experimental science, or scientia experimentalis, making a forceful argument that this was the true crown of all knowledge. For Bacon, experiment was the only way to verify the truths of reasoning and to discover secrets that logic alone could never reveal. This was a radical departure from the purely deductive methods favored by the schools. Within this framework, he discussed everything from the chemistry of gunpowder, a substance he seems to have known about, to the geography of the world and the nature of health and medicine. He described possible inventions like spectacles to aid vision and even hinted at the principles of mechanical propulsion. This was knowledge that was both profoundly useful and, in the wrong hands, potentially disruptive. And this gets to the very heart of why ciphers became necessary within such a grand work. While Pope Clement had asked for his ideas, Bacon was acutely aware that he was walking a political tightrope. The Opus Magus was meant to persuade the highest authority in Christendom of the value of his new scientific method. It had to be persuasive and orthodox enough on the surface to be taken seriously. Yet, Bacon knew that some of his speculations, particularly those touching on alchemy, astrology, and prophetic astrology, could be easily misinterpreted as magic or heresy by his many enemies within the Church. To include these riskier ideas plainly would be to jeopardize the entire project and likely invite further punishment upon himself. Therefore, the ciphers acted as a protective layer. They allowed him to present his most daring conclusions to a learned and sympathetic reader like the Pope, while concealing them from casual or hostile observers. The codes were embedded within the vastness of the opus magus like jewels hidden in a fortress, ensuring that only those with the key, the intellectual curiosity, and the methodological understanding could unlock their full significance. This masterpiece was therefore two things at once: a public plea for intellectual reform and a secret repository of advanced knowledge, a testament to one man's brilliant ambition and the perilous times in which he dared to be brilliant. So what exactly did these protective shields look like on the page? If you were to open one of Roger Bacon's surviving manuscripts, you wouldn't find a simple substitution code where one letter stands for another. Instead, you'd be confronted by a bewildering array of cryptographic techniques, a veritable toolkit of secrecy. The most immediate layer involves a complex system of unusual abbreviations and symbols. Bacon didn't just invent a new alphabet, he manipulated the existing Latin alphabet to create what scholars call a cipher alphabet or nomina code. He would replace common letters with special characters that resemble astronomical signs, alchemical symbols, or simply invented squiggles. A single word could be condensed into an almost unrecognizable string of these cryptic marks. Beyond the strange symbols, Bacon employed another clever tactic: the use of nulls or meaningless characters inserted into the text solely to confuse and mislead an unauthorized reader. Imagine a secret message where every third letter is complete gibberish, placed there to break up recognizable word patterns and make frequency analysis, the standard tool of cryptographers, almost useless. This creates passages that appear to be pure nonsense at first glance, a jumble of letters and symbols that would discourage anyone without the key from even attempting a decipherment. But perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of his system is the theory that these were not standalone codes, but layers of encryption working in concert. A sensitive passage might first be written in a simplified cipher, then have nulls added throughout, and finally be abbreviated using his special symbols. This multi-layered approach suggests that Bacon wasn't just hiding his words, he was building a fortified vault for his ideas. This leads to a critical question: why go to such extraordinary length? The answer lies in the nature of the knowledge he was protecting. We must remember that in the 13th century, the lines between science, philosophy, theology, and what we would now call magic were incredibly blurred. For Bacon, a study of optics could lead to discussions of the nature of light as a divine substance, while an experiment in alchemy could touch upon the fundamental transformation of matter, a concept with deep theological implications. His most sensitive discoveries likely fell into areas that were considered not just advanced but potentially dangerous. This could include detailed astrological predictions about the future of the Church, which could be seen as challenging divine providence, or specific alchemical recipes that, in the wrong hands, could be used for fraud or even weaponry. By using a multi-layered cipher, Bacon ensured that only the most dedicated and worthy reader, someone like the Pope, who had the patience and intellectual resources, could peel back each layer of obscurity to reach the core truth. It was a way of vetting his audience, ensuring that his most explosive ideas would only be comprehended by those with the wisdom to handle them responsibly. The ciphers themselves, therefore, were a filter, separating the curious novice from the genuine seeker of knowledge. But to understand the immense pressure that drove Bacon to develop such an elaborate system, we need to feel the chilling atmosphere of the 13th century. This was an era where intellectual curiosity could be a capital crime. The Church, as the dominant intellectual and moral authority, maintained a cautious, often hostile, stance toward any inquiry that strayed too far from established scripture or the writings of the Church Fathers. The term necromancy wasn't just a fantasy trope. It was a serious accusation that blurred the lines between early science and demonic magic. Any attempt to manipulate nature, whether through alchemical experiments or astrological predictions, risked being labeled as dealing with the black arts, a direct path to charges of heresy. For a friar like Bacon, whose work involved precisely this kind of investigation, the danger was not theoretical. His contemporaries who dabbled in similar fields often faced exile, imprisonment, or worse. This pervasive climate of fear created a powerful incentive for secrecy, a need to clothe radical ideas in garments that would not immediately attract the attention of the inquisitors. Bacon himself was acutely aware of this peril and wrote explicitly about it. He wasn't merely hiding from potential accusers, he was operating on a principle of intellectual security. He frequently warned that powerful knowledge in the wrong hands could lead to catastrophe. He drew a sharp distinction between the worthy philosopher-scientist who sought knowledge to better understand God's creation and benefit humanity, and the unworthy sorcerer or charlatan who might use the same secrets for personal gain, power, or destruction. Think of a formula for gunpowder. In the hands of a moral thinker, it might be studied as a fascinating chemical reaction, but in the hands of a greedy warlord, it could become an instrument of unprecedented terror. Bacon believed that certain truths about the natural world were so potent that they required a moral and intellectual gatekeeper. His ciphers served as that gatekeeper. By making the knowledge difficult to access, he was effectively vetting his readers. Only someone with the patience, the linguistic skill, and the philosophical training to break the code would likely also possess the wisdom to use the information responsibly. The code itself became a test of character. Beyond this fear of misuse and persecution, there was another, more personal motive at play: the protection of his own revolutionary scientific methodology. Bacon was advocating for a paradigm shift, a move away from pure philosophical reasoning toward empirical observation and experimentation. This challenged the very foundations of medieval academic power, which was built upon the authority of ancient texts like those of Aristotle. To suggest that truth could be found by looking through a lens at a fly's wing, rather than by debating Aristotle's writings on biology, was to threaten the entire scholarly establishment. His cries for educational reform, his insistence on learning Greek and Hebrew, and his championing of mathematics were direct critiques of his peers. Encoding these criticisms and the evidence that supported them was a strategic move. It allowed him to communicate his boldest ideas to a sympathetic patron like the Pope, while shielding them from the immediate backlash of powerful rivals within his own Franciscan order who viewed his methods as dangerous novelties. The ciphers were, therefore, a multifaceted shield protecting him from persecution, protecting society from the misuse of powerful secrets, and protecting his fragile intellectual revolution from being crushed before it had a chance to take root. They were the necessary defense mechanism for a mind operating centuries ahead of its time. Yet for all the sophistication of the ciphers within his known works, Roger Bacon's name is often most loudly whispered in connection with a far more famous and utterly impenetrable puzzle, the Voynich Manuscript. This mysterious book is arguably the world's most infamous ciphertext, a code that has stubbornly resisted every attempt at decipherment for over a century. If Bacon's personal codes were a fortified vault, the Voynich is an entire lost city, hidden behind walls that no one has yet found a way to scale. It's a small volume about the size of a modern paperback, filled with over 240 vellum pages. But what makes it so captivating are its contents. The pages are covered in an elegant yet entirely unknown script, flowing from left to right in a hand that suggests a practiced scribe. Alongside this text are hundreds of intricate illustrations, but they depict a world that is hauntingly unfamiliar. There are drawings of plants that seem to belong to no known botanical family, their roots and leaves twisted into impossible shapes. There are circular diagrams of celestial bodies that don't match any recognized astronomical charts, showing nebulous stars and strange intersecting spheres. One particularly peculiar section features dozens of detailed drawings of nude women bathing in or connected to a complex network of green, pipe-like structures, a scene that has baffled interpreters for generations. From its strange herbal section to its astrological charts and what appears to be a biological or pharmaceutical chapter, the manuscript presents a complete, self-contained system of knowledge about a world we simply do not recognize. The theory that Roger Bacon created this bewildering book is not a new one. It gained widespread prominence in the early 20th century thanks to a man named Wilfrid Voynich, the Polish book dealer who purchased the manuscript in 1912 and from whom it takes its name. Voynich was a master of promotion, and he desperately wanted to prove the book's antiquity and importance. He discovered a letter tucked inside the manuscript, written in 1666 by a rector of Charles University in Prague named Johannes Marcus Marci. This letter was addressed to the famed Jesuit scholar Athanasius Kircher, a known expert in Egyptology and cryptography, and it claimed that the mysterious book had once been owned by the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, who had purchased it for the enormous sum of 600 gold ducats. Most crucially, the letter suggested that the original author was none other than the Franciscan friar Roger Bacon. For proponents of this theory, the connection made a certain kind of sense. Bacon was a brilliant mind working at the cutting edge of 13th century science, with known interests in astronomy, botany, and complex codes. The Voynich Manuscript, with its advanced-looking but unidentifiable content, could be seen as the ultimate expression of his encrypted knowledge, a secret encyclopedia of discoveries too radical for his time. However, when we subject this tantalizing theory to the rigors of modern historical and scientific analysis, it begins to falter under the weight of significant evidence. The most damning blow came in 2009, when radiocarbon dating of the vellum pages was finally conducted. The results placed the creation of the manuscript's physical materials squarely between 1404 and 1438. This is a full century after Roger Bacon's death around 1294. While it's theoretically possible that someone was using old vellum, the date aligns perfectly with the script and illustration style, which most paleographers now attribute to the early 15th century, likely from northern Italy. Furthermore, the cipher system used in the Voynich is fundamentally different from the codes Bacon employed in his confirmed writings. Bacon's ciphers, as complex as they were based on the Latin alphabet. They were a disguise for a known language. The Voynich script, despite immense effort, has not been conclusively shown to encode any known language on Earth. Its statistical properties are unique, and it displays patterns that have led many modern cryptographers to suspect it may be an extremely clever hoax, or perhaps a constructed language, rather than a straightforward cipher of English, Latin, or Arabic. The illustrations, once thought to be too strange for this world, are now often interpreted as fanciful but fairly typical for European herbals of the 15th century, just rendered with a unique and puzzling specificity. So, if Bacon almost certainly didn't write it, why does the connection persist so powerfully in the public imagination? The answer lies in the enduring allure of both figures. Roger Bacon represents the archetype of the persecuted genius, the wise man ahead of his time, forced to hide his knowledge in code. The Voynich Manuscript is the ultimate unsolved mystery, a book that looks like it should contain profound secrets. Linking the two creates a perfectly satisfying narrative, the greatest cipher by the greatest cipher maker. It's a story that ties up a 700-year-old mystery with a neat, dramatic bow. But the truth is likely more complex and, in its own way, even more fascinating. The Voynich Manuscript stands as a monumental puzzle in its own right, a testament to the fact that the Middle Ages and the Renaissance were filled with ingenious, creative, and secretive minds whose works we are still struggling to understand. While it probably doesn't hold the lost scientific secrets of Roger Bacon, it remains a powerful symbol of the human desire to encode knowledge, to create mysteries, and to leave behind a legacy that challenges future generations to think, to question, and to wonder. Among the many tantalizing possibilities for what lies hidden within Bacon's cryptic scripts, the theory that he encoded alchemical secrets stands out as particularly compelling. To grasp why this idea holds such weight, we must first set aside modern caricatures of alchemy as mere fool's gold or primitive chemistry. In the 13th century, alchemy represented a profound and sophisticated philosophical tradition. It was a spiritual and scientific pursuit aimed at understanding the fundamental principles of transformation that governed the entire cosmos. At its heart were two legendary goals: the creation of the Philosopher's Stone, a substance believed to possess the power to transmute base metals like lead into pure gold, and the discovery of the elixir of life, a universal medicine that could grant longevity, if not outright immortality. For a thinker like Roger Bacon, these were not simply recipes for wealth or personal gain. They were metaphors for a much grander process of purification and enlightenment. The transformation of a dull, imperfect metal into a perfect, incorruptible one mirrored the soul's own journey towards spiritual perfection. Why would Bacon, a Franciscan friar, be so deeply invested in such a seemingly materialistic art? His interest was entirely consistent with his wider worldview. Bacon saw the natural world as a divine creation, and to unlock its secrets was to come closer to understanding the mind of God. He believed that alchemy, when practiced correctly, was a legitimate science that revealed the hidden properties of matter. The ability to accelerate a natural process of metallic maturation, which alchemists believed occurred deep within the earth over eons, would be the ultimate demonstration of humanity's God-given reason and dominion over nature. Furthermore, the medicinal aspect, the quest for the elixir of life, aligned perfectly with his advocacy for experimental science to improve the human condition. A universal panacea would be the greatest possible benefit to mankind, curing disease and alleviating suffering. For Bacon, this knowledge was a sacred trust, a form of wisdom that carried immense responsibility. And it is this very sense of responsibility that explains why such secrets would need the protection of a cipher. In the wrong hands, the formula for the Philosopher's Stone would be catastrophically dangerous. Imagine the economic and social chaos if a single individual, particularly a ruthless ruler or a greedy merchant, could produce unlimited gold at will. The entire foundation of medieval economy, based on the scarcity of precious metals, would collapse overnight, potentially leading to war, famine, and tyranny. Bacon understood this power dynamic intimately. He wrote extensively about the moral dangers of knowledge, warning that powerful truths required a wise and virtuous custodian. By encoding his alchemical discoveries, he was not just hiding a chemical formula, he was installing a moral safeguard. The cipher ensured that only someone with the intellectual perseverance, linguistic skill, and Bacon would argue the spiritual maturity to unlock the code would also possess the wisdom to use its power for the benefit of humanity, not for its destruction. The code itself became a test of the reader's character. This theory gains further credence from the fact that alchemical texts were among the most commonly encrypted writings of the Middle Ages, as their authors sought to communicate with a small circle of initiates while avoiding persecution from a church suspicious of their magical claims or from secular authorities fearful of economic disruption. Bacon's ciphers, therefore, can be seen as the ultimate containment vessel for what he believed was the most potent and perilous knowledge in the world. Beyond the mystical allure of alchemy, another dimension of Bacon's encrypted knowledge points toward a future he seemed to see with astonishing clarity: the realm of advanced technology. His writings that have survived in plain text are already peppered with prophetic descriptions of inventions that would not materialize for centuries. He wrote of ships that can move without oars, chariots that can travel without animals, and flying machines with wings that beat like a bird's. But it was in the science of optics, or what he called perspectiva, that his genius truly shone. He conducted meticulous experiments with lenses, correctly describing the principles of reflection, refraction, and even the anatomy of the human eye. He understood that by arranging lenses in a specific way, one could magnify distant objects or reveal the hidden details of the very small, laying the conceptual groundwork for both the telescope and the microscope long before their actual invention in the 17th century. The tantalizing question then becomes, did his understanding stop at general principles? Or did his ciphers contain something far more concrete? It is one thing to philosophize about the possibility of magnification. It is another to provide detailed diagrams for grinding specific types of glass, calculating focal lengths, and assembling the precise tube structures needed for a functional optical instrument. For a mind as rigorously practical as Bacon's, who constantly emphasized the importance of hands-on experimentation, it is entirely plausible that he moved beyond theory into detailed engineering. The ciphers could have served as the perfect vessel for these technical blueprints. Sharing such designs openly would have been fraught with danger. In an age dominated by theological explanation, a device that could bring the craters of the moon or the intricate legs of an insect into clear view would challenge fundamental beliefs about the cosmos and humanity's place within it. Such power to reveal nature's hidden layers could easily be branded as diabolical sorcery, a tool for peering into realms meant only for God. This notion of sharing knowledge only with an enlightened few is central to understanding this theory. Bacon was deeply pessimistic about the intellectual state of his contemporaries. He saw them as misguided, relying on flawed translations and arrogant logic rather than humble observation. He believed that true wisdom had to be carefully disseminated to those prepared to receive it, individuals who possessed not just intelligence but also moral virtue. A pope, a noble patron, or a fellow experimentalist he trusted could be part of this privileged audience. For them, the ciphers would act as a key. Unlocking the code would reveal not just instructions for building a lens, but a whole new way of seeing the world. It would be an initiation into a method of inquiry based on empirical evidence, a silent revolution contained within a series of encrypted instructions. The very act of deciphering would prove the reader's dedication and intellectual fitness, ensuring that this transformative technology would not fall into the hands of those who might use it for deception, espionage, or simply to reinforce their own dogmatic errors. Consider the profound implications if this theory is correct. Hidden within those 13th century manuscripts could be plans for a simple microscope, which would have allowed the first glimpses into the world of microorganisms, revolutionizing medicine centuries before Leeuwenhoek. Or perhaps there were designs for a reflecting telescope, an idea not credited until Newton. This would mean that the scientific revolution, which we place in the 16th and 17th centuries, had a secret precursor, its seeds planted by a Franciscan friar whose work was deliberately obscured for its own protection. The ciphers, then, are not merely hiding inventions, they are preserving the catalyst for a paradigm shift that the world was not yet ready to undergo. They represent a timeline of scientific progress that was intentionally paused, its most critical instructions locked away in a code that, perhaps, we have not yet fully broken, leaving us to wonder what other technological leaps were within Bacon's grasp, waiting silently in the margins of a medieval text for the right mind to finally understand them. But perhaps the most perilous territory Bacon's ciphers may have ventured into lies not in the manipulation of matter, but in the prediction of future events. To a modern mind, this might seem like an odd diversion for a scientific thinker, but for a 13th century scholar like Bacon, the study of prophecy and astrology was a serious and integrated part of understanding God's universe. He saw the cosmos as a single, interconnected whole, where the movements of celestial bodies were not random but were part of a divine order that could influence life on Earth. This wasn't the simplistic horoscope of today. It was a complex system for reading the book of nature, a way to discern God's will and the grand sweep of history. Bacon believed that major celestial events, great conjunctions of planets, comets, and eclipses were divine signs, portents that heralded the rise and fall of empires, the coming of great religious reformers, and even the eventual end of the world. This belief made the topic of prophecy incredibly sensitive, especially when applied to the most powerful institution of his day, the Church itself. Imagine the sheer audacity and the immense danger of a friar encoding predictions about the future of the papacy, the potential for a great schism, or the coming of a final apocalyptic age. For an institution that claimed to be the ultimate and unchanging authority on earth, any suggestion that its power might wane or be transformed according to a celestial timetable would be viewed as the deepest form of heresy. It would challenge the very notion of divine permanence that the Church was built upon. Bacon was keenly aware of this. He wrote openly about the need for moral and structural reform within the Church, criticizing the corruption and intellectual laziness he saw among the clergy. It is not a great leap to suspect that his encrypted writings might have gone much further, containing specific astrological calculations that pointed toward a tumultuous future, perhaps even predicting the arrival of an Antichrist figure or a great purifying event that would shake Christendom to its core. This theory is strengthened by the known interests of his most powerful patron, Pope Clement IV. The Pope did not ask Bacon for a simple scientific report. He requested his philosophical writings on subjects that could benefit the Church. What could be more beneficial or more dangerous than a forewarning of future challenges? Bacon may have believed he was providing the Pope with a crucial strategic tool, a kind of divine intelligence briefing that would allow the Church to prepare for or even avert prophesied disasters. But to put such explosive predictions in plain text would be to invite instant condemnation. The ciphers provided a secure channel, a way to communicate these volatile insights directly to the highest authority while leaving no trace for his enemies within the Franciscan order or the broader church hierarchy to use against him. The codes acted as a confidential filter, ensuring that only a pope whom Bacon might have hoped was enlightened enough to understand the astrological science behind the predictions would receive the full, unvarnished truth. The content of these potential prophecies would have been rooted in the astrological theories of the time, which often linked planetary cycles to grand historical patterns. For instance, the slow, centuries-long movement of Jupiter and Saturn through the zodiac was thought to mark the rise and fall of major religions and dynasties. A particular alignment might be interpreted as signaling the end of the Christian era or the dawn of a new age of spiritual enlightenment. Bacon, with his profound knowledge of astronomy and his desire to synthesize all knowledge, would have been perfectly positioned to make such calculations. The real secret locked in his ciphers, then, might not have been a list of specific dates and events, but rather a complete methodological framework for prophetic astrology, a scientific system for forecasting history itself. This would represent the ultimate fusion of his empirical spirit with his theological beliefs, a daring attempt to use observation and mathematics to read the divine script of time. And it is precisely this fusion, this application of science to the most sacred and unpredictable domain of divine will, that would have made it the most dangerous knowledge of all, requiring the strongest possible encryption to survive. While his scientific and prophetic ideas were already pushing the boundaries of acceptability, the most perilous secrets Roger Bacon may have encrypted could have been his most deeply held convictions about the Church itself. We must remember that Bacon was not an outsider criticizing from a distance. He was a devout Franciscan friar operating from within the very institution he sought to reform. His critiques were therefore not the rantings of a heretic, but the anguished observations of a loyal son who believed the Church was losing its way, compromising its spiritual mission through corruption, intellectual stagnation, and a neglect of its core duties. To express these views openly, especially for a member of a religious order bound by vows of obedience, was not just risky, it was potentially treasonous against the highest spiritual authority on earth. His criticisms were wide-ranging and remarkably bold. He lambasted the clergy, from the local parish priests all the way up to the highest levels of the curia, for their ignorance and moral failings. He saw many churchmen as lazy, more interested in accumulating wealth and political power than in pastoral care or deep theological study. He was particularly scathing about what he called the 4 chief sources of corruption in education, which were directly tied to the church's intellectual leaders: an unthinking reliance on outdated authority figures, the influence of long-standing bad habits, the opinions of an uneducated populace, and the pride of individuals who pretended to know more than they did. For Bacon, this intellectual rot was not a minor issue. It was a crisis that prevented the Church from effectively understanding Scripture and leading humanity toward salvation. He argued that the widespread ignorance of languages like Greek, Hebrew, and Arabic meant that theologians were debating errors in translations rather than the true Word of God. This was a direct challenge to the entire scholastic establishment of his day, which built elaborate philosophical castles on what Bacon believed was a foundation of sand. But his proposed reforms went far beyond just suggesting everyone learn Greek. Bacon envisioned a complete overhaul of the entire Christian educational system, centering it on the very empirical sciences and linguistic studies that the traditional authorities viewed with suspicion. He believed that a proper understanding of the natural world through mathematics, optics, and alchemy was essential for a true interpretation of the Bible and for defending the faith against its critics. Imagine the audacity of arguing that a bishop needed to understand alchemical principles or the geometry of light to be an effective leader. To the powerful, tradition-bound theologians of the 13th century, this would have sounded like madness at best and a dangerous subversion of the proper order of knowledge at worst. It directly threatened their authority, which was based on mastery of a specific type of philosophical debate, not on experimental science. This is where the need for ciphers becomes a matter of survival. To write plainly that the Church's leadership was corrupt and its intellectual foundations were flawed would have been an instant ticket to a dungeon or worse. Charges of heresy were not taken lightly. They could lead to defrocking, imprisonment, and in extreme cases, execution. Bacon had already experienced the sting of official disapproval, likely facing a period of confinement within his own order. The act of encoding his most radical theological and reformist ideas was therefore a necessary act of self-preservation, but it was also a strategic move. By sending his encrypted works to Pope Clement IV, he was attempting an end run around his enemies. He was placing his blueprint for reform directly into the hands of the one man with the authority to enact it, while simultaneously hiding that blueprint from the very church officials who would have moved to silence him. The ciphers allowed him to be a loyal critic, a reformer working from the inside, using secrecy as his only available tool to speak truth to power without being instantly crushed by it. The codes were not just hiding ideas, they were facilitating a private conversation with the Pope about the salvation of the entire Church, a conversation that Bacon knew could not happen in the open. The challenge of unlocking Roger Bacon's secrets did not die with him. Almost as soon as his manuscripts began to circulate in limited copies among monastic and university libraries, a small but determined group of readers recognized that they were looking at more than just a philosophical treatise. They saw the strange symbols, the intentional obfuscations, and they understood that something vital was being concealed. The first attempts at decryption were likely made by fellow Franciscans or university scholars in the decades following his death around 1294. These were men trained in the same scholastic traditions, familiar with Latin and the standard abbreviations of the day, yet they quickly hit a wall. Bacon's system was not a simple monastic shorthand. It was a deliberate cryptographic fortress. The use of invented symbols that bore no relation to common letter forms, combined with the strategic insertion of meaningless null characters, rendered traditional reading methods useless. A scholar expecting to find a logical argument would instead find a page of what appeared to be alchemical nonsense or astronomical gibberish, designed to frustrate and deter the uninitiated. As Europe transitioned from the Middle Ages into the Renaissance, a new breed of thinker became fascinated by Bacon's work. The humanist scholars of the 15th and 16th centuries, who were rediscovering classical knowledge and pushing the boundaries of science, saw Bacon not as a dusty relic but as a kindred spirit. Figures like John Dee, the Elizabethan mathematician, astrologer, and advisor to Queen Elizabeth I, became utterly consumed by the mystery. Dee was a brilliant and complex man, a genuine scientist who was also deeply immersed in the world of angelic magic and hermetic philosophy. He acquired several of Bacon's manuscripts and saw them as a potential key to a vast repository of ancient wisdom, a lost Prisca theologia or primeval theology that contained all knowledge. For Dee, cracking Bacon's code was not an academic exercise. It was a spiritual quest to recover divine secrets that would restore humanity to a prelapsarian state of enlightenment. Dee's approach, however, was hampered by the intellectual framework of his time. He and his contemporaries often interpreted Bacon's ciphers through a lens of magic and mysticism. They suspected the codes guarded recipes for the philosopher's stone or instructions for summoning angelic intelligences. This assumption likely sent them down countless blind alleys. Instead of applying a systematic, frequency-based analysis to the texts, they may have searched for patterns based on Kabbalistic numerology or astrological correspondences, methods that were ill-suited to Bacon's more pragmatic and linguistic encryption techniques. Despite his immense erudition, Dee, like those before him, ultimately failed to make significant headway. His efforts, documented in his own extensive diaries and marginal notes, testify to the cipher's formidable nature. He recognized the value but lacked the key, and his failure set a precedent that would daunt experts for centuries. The puzzle of Roger Bacon was not merely difficult, it was of a different order of complexity altogether. This initial period of failed decryption attempts cemented the legend of Bacon's ciphers. Each generation's brightest minds would take up the challenge, only to be forced to lay it down again, baffled. This repeated failure served an unintended purpose. It acted as the very filter Bacon had perhaps intended. It preserved the secrets not through the strength of parchment and ink, but through the sheer intellectual barrier of the code itself. The early efforts, from anonymous monks to Renaissance magi, proved that the codes were not a trivial puzzle. They established that understanding Bacon's full message would require more than just scholarly patience. It would demand a new way of thinking about language, secrecy, and science itself. The stage was now set for a much more methodical assault, one that would emerge from an age of reason and later from the dawn of modern warfare. Yet the flame of Bacon's mystery, though flickering in the medieval dark, refused to be extinguished. It would take a figure of immense and contradictory genius, leaping forward 3 centuries into the glittering and paranoid court of Elizabeth I, to fan those embers into a roaring blaze. That man was John Dee, a name that itself conjures images of crystal balls and whispered incantations, yet one who stood at the very crossroads of emerging science and ancient magic. Dee was a polymath in the truest sense, a brilliant mathematician consulted by navigators charting the New World, a respected astronomer, and a devoted antiquarian whose personal library was one of the largest and most celebrated in all of Europe. But it was his role as a passionate seeker of what he termed the pure verities that drove him to become one of history's most significant and most frustrated guardians of the Baconian enigma. Dee's obsession with Roger Bacon was profound and deeply personal. He did not see the 13th century friar as a historical curiosity. He saw him as a direct predecessor, a fellow traveler on the path to recovering what Dee believed was a lost golden age of wisdom. In the sprawling, shadow-filled rooms of his home at Mortlake, Dee pored over the few precious manuscripts of Bacon's work he had managed to acquire. He was convinced these texts were not merely philosophical arguments but were literal treasure maps, encoded with the very formulas for the Philosopher's Stone, the secrets of angelic communication, and the keys to a universal language that would unlock all of nature's mysteries. For Dee, Bacon was the last great master of a pristine knowledge that had been passed down from Adam through the ancient Egyptians and Plato, and which had been tragically fragmented and obscured over time. Cracking Bacon's ciphers was therefore a sacred mission, a means of restoring a divine science that would heal a fallen world. This conviction fueled Dee's own intensive cryptographic efforts. He filled the margins of his books with complex annotations, employing a bewildering array of symbols of his own invention, a personal cipher alphabet known as the Enochian script, which he claimed was delivered to him by angels. He approached Bacon's codes not with the dispassionate analysis of a modern linguist, but with the tools of a Renaissance magus. He looked for patterns based on gematria, where letters correspond to numbers, seeking hidden numerical harmonies. He searched for astrological alignments, believing the positions of the planets at the time of a manuscript's creation might hold the key. His method was a blend of intense scholarly rigor and profound mystical belief, a combination that, while intellectually formidable, may have ultimately led him astray. He was trying to solve a lock with a key designed for a different kind of door, assuming Bacon's secrets were primarily magical when they were likely far more pragmatic and scientific. Despite his lack of definitive success, John Dee's influence on the Bacon story cannot be overstated. He became a living bridge, tirelessly promoting Bacon's importance to the powerful and learned figures of his day. In his massive work, the Monas Hieroglyphica, a dense and cryptic treatise on his own mystical symbol, Dee explicitly positioned his ideas within a tradition he believed Bacon exemplified. By doing so, he ensured that the name of Roger Bacon remained circulating among the intellectual elite, transforming him from a semi-obscure medieval scholar into a legendary, almost mythical figure, the wise wizard who had concealed ultimate power within his text. Dee's fervent advocacy created a legacy of intrigue that would captivate future generations of Rosicrucians, Freemasons, and secret societies, who all came to see Bacon as an founding adept of their esoteric traditions. In many ways, Dee's greatest contribution was his failure. His inability to fully decipher the manuscripts, despite his immense learning and dedication, served as a powerful testament to the sophistication of Bacon's original encryption. It proved that these were not simple puzzles to be solved in an afternoon, but intellectual fortresses that had successfully repelled one of the sharpest minds of the Elizabethan age. This very failure added a new layer of prestige and impenetrability to the legend, ensuring that the mystery would not fade away but would instead pass onward, a tantalizing challenge waiting for the next era with its new tools and new ways of thinking to take up the quest. The tide of history turned again in the early 20th century, an era defined by both dazzling scientific advancement and a renewed fascination with the occult. It was against this backdrop that a seemingly definitive breakthrough emerged, one that promised to finally shatter the 700-year silence of Roger Bacon's ciphers. The man at the center of this storm was William Romain Newbold, a respected and charismatic philosophy professor at the University of Pennsylvania. In the early 1920s, Newbold made a stunning announcement that captivated the public and academic worlds alike. He had not only cracked Bacon's code, but had discovered that the medieval friar possessed knowledge so advanced it bordered on the miraculous. Newbold's method was as intricate as it was novel. He began with the assumption that Bacon's cipher operated on multiple, deeply hidden levels. His key insight was that the true message was not contained in the strange symbols themselves, but in the microscopic shapes and imperfections within those symbols. Using a powerful magnifying glass, Newbold meticulously examined photographic enlargements of the few available Bacon manuscripts. He claimed to discern tiny, deliberate strokes and curves almost like a form of microscopic shorthand that he believed were inscribed within the larger letters. These micro-characters, he argued, formed a secondary, secret alphabet. The process of decryption then became a painstaking exercise. First, he would transcribe these nearly invisible marks. Then he would apply a complex cipher based on Roman numerals and a system of anagrams, rearranging the letters to form Latin words. It was a method that required immense patience and an almost artistic interpretation, relying heavily on Newbold's own intuition. The conclusions he drew from this arduous process were nothing short of breathtaking. Newbold proclaimed that Bacon had not only theorized about optical instruments, but had actually built a powerful telescope centuries before Galileo. Through this device, Bacon had supposedly observed the Andromeda Nebula and correctly identified it as a spiral galaxy, a fact not confirmed by astronomy until the 20th century. The deciphered passages allegedly described the cellular structure of plants, revealed through a microscope of his own invention. Most astonishingly, Newbold interpreted certain sequences as descriptions of the harnessing of nuclear energy and even the formula for creating the Philosopher's Stone. For a world still reeling from the marvels of Einstein's theories and the horrors of the First World War, the idea of a 13th century nuclear physicist was both electrifying and deeply romantic. It seemed to confirm the legend of Bacon as the ultimate wizard, a seer who had glimpsed the entire arc of human scientific achievement. Initially, the academic world was swept up in the excitement. Newbold was a credible scholar, and his claims were presented with persuasive detail. However, as other experts began to scrutinize his work, the entire edifice began to crumble. The most damning criticism came from fellow cryptographers and paleographers who pointed out a fatal flaw in Newbold's method: its lack of objectivity. The microscopic strokes he claimed to see were, in the eyes of other researchers, simply the natural irregularities of ink on ancient vellum, the random cracks, flecks, and where patterns accumulated over 6 centuries. Because the cipher key was based on interpreting these subjective marks, there was no way for another scholar to independently apply Newbold's system and arrive at the same result. The process was not a reproducible scientific method. It was more akin to finding shapes in clouds where the interpreter's own expectations dictated the outcome. The anagramming step was equally problematic, as it allowed for such flexibility in rearranging letters that one could theoretically derive almost any message desired from a given set of characters. The academic consensus turned decisively against Newbold. His decipherments were ultimately dismissed as a classic case of scholarly pareidolia, the human tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random noise. He had not discovered Bacon's secrets. He had projected the wonders of his own 20th century world onto the ambiguous scratches of a medieval manuscript. Despite this rejection, Newbold's episode was far from a useless diversion. It highlighted the immense difficulty of the puzzle and the powerful temptation to force a solution onto an intractable mystery. His failed attempt served as a crucial cautionary tale for future codebreakers, demonstrating that any legitimate decipherment must be based on a consistent, objective system that can be tested and verified by others. The dream of instantly unlocking Bacon's mind was over, but the meticulous, less glamorous work of true historical cryptography was just beginning. The initial wave of excitement surrounding Newbold's claims inevitably gave way to rigorous scrutiny, and it was here that the foundations of his decipherment began to fracture under the weight of expert analysis. The central figure in this scholarly pushback was John Matthews Manley, a formidable philologist and cryptographer from the University of Chicago. Manley was no stranger to complex puzzles. He had served as a senior cryptanalyst for American military intelligence during the First World War, breaking German codes with a methodical, evidence-based approach. He brought this same disciplined skepticism to Newbold's work, and what he found was deeply troubling. Manley's primary critique was devastatingly simple. Newbold's entire method was fundamentally unscientific because it was not replicable. For a decipherment to be accepted as valid, other trained experts must be able to follow the same steps and arrive at the same conclusions. Yet, when Manley and his colleagues examined the same manuscript photographs Newbold had used, they simply could not see the consistent, deliberate microscopic characters he described. Instead, they observed something far more mundane, the natural topography of ancient vellum. Over centuries, animal skin parchment contracts, cracks, and wears. Ink pools in microscopic fissures, flakes off in tiny particles, and fades unevenly. What Newbold had interpreted as a sophisticated microscopic shorthand was, in Manley's view, almost certainly a classic case of pareidolia, the human brain's tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random noise, like seeing a face in the clouds or the man in the moon. Newbold, convinced he held the key, was essentially finding shapes in the intellectual clouds of the manuscript. He was connecting random ink blots and the fibrous texture of the parchment into a coherent system that existed more in his mind than on the page. This subjective interpretation meant that the very first step of his process, the transcription of the micro-characters, was entirely dependent on the observer's preconceptions. There was no objective standard. One person might see a tiny A, while another would see only a random scratch. Even if one accepted Newbold's transcriptions, the next stage of his method was equally problematic. His system relied heavily on anagramming, taking the sequence of letters he believed he had found and rearranging them to form Latin words. But as Manley pointed out, the rules Newbold applied for these anagrams were so flexible that they could produce almost any desired result from a given set of letters. It was a cryptographic free-for-all. If the initial decryption didn't yield a sensible word, Newbold might drop a letter, add one, or rearrange the sequence until something vaguely meaningful emerged. This lack of constraint meant the cipher was not actually locking a message. It was more like a linguistic Rorschach test, reflecting back whatever the codebreaker hoped to find. The spectacular nature of his conclusions, telescopes, cells, nuclear energy, began to look less like a discovery and more like a projection of early 20th century scientific wonders onto a medieval canvas. Newbold hadn't uncovered Roger Bacon's mind. He had unwittingly revealed the preoccupations of his own era. The ultimate discrediting of Newbold's theory serves as a permanent cautionary tale in the fields of cryptography and historical research. It highlights the profound danger of confirmation bias, where a researcher's passionate desire to solve a mystery can unconsciously override objective analysis. Newbold was not a fraud. He was a brilliant man who fell victim to one of the most subtle traps of intellectual inquiry. His story underscores a critical principle. An extraordinary claim requires not just extraordinary evidence, but verifiable evidence. A decipherment that cannot be independently checked and validated by peers remains in the realm of speculation, no matter how compelling its narrative might be. The collapse of his theory was a sobering moment that forced scholars to return to square one, but it also cleared the air of a tantalizing yet ultimately misleading distraction. It reaffirmed that the path to understanding Roger Bacon's true secrets would have to be paved with rigorous, methodical, and collaborative effort, a painstaking process that was just beginning to find its footing with the tools of a new century. The dramatic rise of digital computing in the latter half of the 20th century promised a final, decisive assault on the ancient puzzle. If the human eye, even aided by magnifying glasses and scholarly intuition, had proven insufficient, then surely the brute force calculation power of machines could crack the code. Modern cryptanalysts approach the problem with a new set of tools, viewing Bacon's manuscripts not as mystical artifacts but as data sets. Their primary weapon was frequency analysis, a cornerstone of code breaking. This technique relies on the fact that in any given language, certain letters and letter combinations appear with predictable regularity. In English, for example, the letter E is the most common, and combinations like th and he are frequent. The first step for computer-assisted researchers was to digitize the texts, translating Bacon's strange symbols into a consistent electronic alphabet. Then they could run sophisticated programs to count the occurrence of each character, searching for statistical patterns that would map onto the known frequencies of Latin, the language Bacon primarily wrote in. This computational approach revealed fascinating complexities. In some sections of Bacon's encrypted writings, the frequency distributions did indeed resemble a substitution cipher for Latin. Certain symbols appeared with the expected regularity of vowels, while others clustered like consonants. This was a promising sign, suggesting that at least one layer of the encryption might be a straightforward, if elaborate, letter replacement system. However, the moment analysts tried to apply these patterns consistently across the entire text, the system would break down. Symbols that seemed to represent common letters in one paragraph would become rare in the next. This inconsistency pointed directly to Bacon's cunning use of nulls, or meaningless characters inserted to deliberately distort the statistical picture. A computer looking for a clean frequency signature would be completely fooled by a text where a significant percentage of the characters were random placeholders, designed solely to scramble the data and mislead automated analysis. The machine, for all its power, was being tripped up by a 700-year-old security feature. Beyond simple frequency counts, researchers turned to the more nuanced field of computational linguistics. This involves programming computers to recognize higher-level patterns inherent to natural language, such as the expected length of words, the structure of syllables, and the typical ways words follow one another. For instance, a short word is often an article like the or a, while a three-letter word ending in a vowel might be a preposition. Advanced algorithms scanned Bacon's encrypted texts for these linguistic footprints. They looked for repeated sequences of symbols that could indicate common words or phrases, and they analyzed the spacing between symbols to identify potential word boundaries. Yet again, Bacon's methods proved remarkably resilient. The suspected use of abbreviations and special symbols for common word endings or prefixes further complicated the linguistic model. A single symbol might stand for an entire common Latin suffix like coram or ribus, completely throwing off the computer's expectations about word length and structure. What appeared to be a three-symbol word might, in reality, be a complex abbreviation for a much longer term. The ultimate challenge, and the reason no solution has yet gained universal acceptance, lies in the fundamental ambiguity of the data itself. Unlike a modern encrypted message where we know for certain that every character is meaningful, with Bacon we cannot be sure what we are even looking at. Scholars still debate the most basic questions. Is the Voynich Manuscript, for instance, a cipher for a known language, a constructed artificial language, or an elaborate hoax? This underlying uncertainty means that any proposed decipherment, no matter how clever, can be challenged on the grounds that the initial assumptions are wrong. A solution that produces coherent Latin when applied to one page might generate gibberish on the next. Another researcher, using a slightly different set of rules for handling abbreviations or nulls, might produce an entirely different but equally plausible-sounding translation from the same string of symbols. Without a Rosetta Stone, a parallel text in a known language that provides the key, every decipherment remains a hypothesis, a compelling story that fits the data but cannot be definitively proven. This does not mean, however, that modern efforts have been in vain. Each failed attempt has slowly built a collective understanding of what Bacon's encryption system is not, gradually narrowing the field of possibilities. The consistent failure of straightforward statistical attacks has reinforced the idea that we are dealing with a multi-layered system of exceptional sophistication for its time. It suggests that Bacon was not merely obscuring his words, but was actively employing anti-cryptographic techniques centuries before such concepts were formally understood. The ongoing puzzle serves as a humbling reminder that the human mind, even one from the distant past, can create structures of logic and secrecy that continue to resist the most powerful analytical tools of the present. The quest has evolved from a search for a single secret message to a deeper appreciation of the cryptographic genius of Roger Bacon himself, a man who engineered a vault for his ideas so well that its lock has yet to be picked. But what if we've been searching for the lock in the wrong place entirely? For centuries, the primary assumption has been that Roger Bacon's secrets are locked away within the jumbles of strange symbols and apparent gibberish. But a compelling alternative theory suggests we should not be looking for coded text at all. Instead, we should be examining the words that are already in plain sight. This is the intriguing possibility of steganography, the ancient art of concealing a message within another, seemingly innocent message. Unlike cryptography, which aims to make a message unreadable, steganography aims to make it invisible, hiding it in plain view where no one would even think to look. The concept is far older than Bacon himself. The ancient Greeks wrote messages on wooden tablets and then covered them with wax, creating a blank surface for a harmless message. Invisible inks made from milk, lemon juice, or vinegar have been used for millennia, revealing their secrets only when heated. Bacon, with his vast knowledge of classical and Arabic scientific texts, would have been intimately familiar with these techniques. The genius of applying steganography to his situation is its sheer subtlety. A complex cipher, no matter how well designed, is a clear announcement that a secret exists. It shouts, "Decipher me," to anyone who sees it, inviting scrutiny and attack. Steganography, by contrast, whispers. It avoids attracting attention in the first place. For a man needing to communicate sensitive ideas under the watchful eyes of powerful enemies, hiding a dangerous truth within a long, orthodox theological or scientific treatise would be the perfect camouflage. The real message would be safe, not because it was hard to read, but because it was virtually impossible to detect. So, how might Bacon have implemented such a system? One of the most straightforward methods involves acrostics, where the first letter of each line or paragraph in a text spells out a hidden word or phrase. A devout monk composing a prayer or a scholarly commentary would be expected to write in a structured, formal style. No one would suspect that the initial capitals of his lengthy chapters, when read in sequence, formed a concise instruction for an alchemical process or a coded warning about a future event. Another technique could involve a skip code or a book cipher. Bacon might have agreed with a trusted confidant on a key text, such as a specific edition of the Bible or a work by Aristotle. The hidden message would then be encoded as a series of numbers, page number, line number, word number. To anyone else, the numbers would be meaningless, but the intended recipient could use them to pluck the significant words from the agreed-upon book, reconstructing the secret communication. The true message wouldn't exist on Bacon's page at all. It would only materialize in the mind of the reader who knew where to look. Perhaps the most sophisticated possibility is that Bacon used the actual linguistic content of his plaintext to convey a secondary meaning. This goes beyond simple letter patterns and delves into the realm of nuanced literary construction. He could have deliberately chosen words with double meanings, crafting sentences that read as a straightforward scientific argument on the surface, but which, to a reader in the know, would resonate with a completely different hidden significance. A discussion about the purification of metals in an alchemical context could simultaneously be a metaphor for the purification of the church. A passage on the refraction of light might contain a veiled analogy for the bending of truth by corrupt authorities. This method would be the ultimate steganographic feat because the message is not physically separate from the carrier text. It is woven into its very fabric. There would be no hidden text to find, only a deeper layer of interpretation to unlock, one that required a shared set of philosophical or symbolic keys between the writer and his intended reader. The appeal of the steganography hypothesis is that it elegantly solves one of the biggest puzzles surrounding Bacon's known works, their sheer volume and surface-level orthodoxy. His major texts like the Opus Majus are enormous, learned, and largely acceptable to the Church. They were, after all, sent to the Pope. If the entire purpose was to hide secrets, why write hundreds of pages of legitimate philosophy? Steganography provides a satisfying answer. The vast, approved text was not a distraction from the secret, it was the essential vehicle for it. The more impressive and orthodox the surface message, the less likely anyone would dig for a deeper one. It allowed Bacon to present his public face as a loyal reformer while simultaneously communicating his most private and radical thoughts to a single, enlightened individual. The ciphers we can see, the strange symbols and nulls, might then be a decoy, a second layer of protection designed to occupy and frustrate any investigator who grew suspicious, leading them on a wild goose chase while the true secret remained peacefully hidden in the open, undetected and safe. This theory challenges us to read Bacon not just as a scientist or a cryptographer, but as a master of literary deception, a man who understood that the best way to preserve a dangerous idea was to never let anyone know it was there in the first place. This pursuit of a universal language was not merely an academic exercise for these thinkers. It was a philosophical and almost spiritual quest. Many believed that the confusion of tongues after the biblical story of the Tower of Babel was not just a punishment but the very root of humanity's misunderstanding and conflict. The languages of the world, they argued, were imperfect, arbitrary, and disconnected from the true nature of the things they described. A word like tree in English has no inherent connection to the tall, leafy plant itself. It's just an agreed-upon label. This disconnection allowed for ambiguity, deception, and flawed reasoning. A perfect language, by contrast, would be a direct mirror of reality. Each word would be constructed from basic, elemental symbols whose combinations would logically and visibly represent the essence of the object or concept. In such a system, the word for a specific type of tree would somehow contain within its structure the ideas of wood, growth, leaf, and height, creating a direct, unbreakable link between the symbol and the thing itself. To speak or write in this language would be to reason with perfect clarity, eliminating misunderstanding and revealing the true structure of God's creation. For a mind like Bacon's, dedicated to empirical observation and logical order, the attraction to such a system would have been profound. Applying this lens to Bacon's ciphers opens up a radically different way of interpreting the strange symbols. Perhaps what we are looking at is not a cipher at all, but the lexicon and grammar of this new language. The unusual characters, which so often resemble alchemical or astronomical signs, might not be arbitrary replacements for Latin letters. Instead, they could be ideograms, each symbol representing a fundamental concept or category of thought. A squiggle that looks like a wave might fundamentally mean liquid or flow. A symbol resembling a star might represent light or celestial influence. By combining these basic symbols according to a strict, logical grammar, Bacon could construct complex words and sentences that directly diagrammed his advanced scientific ideas. A passage that appears to be a jumble of odd icons might in fact be a precise description of a chemical reaction or an optical principle, written in a language where the form of the writing illustrates the function of the concept. This would explain why frequency analysis often fails. The text isn't based on the common letters of Latin, but on the recurring conceptual building blocks of Bacon's own philosophical system. The implications of this theory are staggering. If correct, it would mean that Roger Bacon was attempting something far more ambitious than just hiding secrets. He was trying to build a new foundation for all human knowledge, a tool for thinking that was immune to the corruptions of ordinary language. His encrypted works would then be more than just private diaries. They would be textbooks and manifestos written in this new, perfect tongue, waiting for a future generation of enlightened thinkers to learn its rules and comprehend its truths. This transforms the cipher from a lockbox into a seed, containing not just specific discoveries, but the very method for making infinite new ones. The difficulty in deciphering it would be immense, as it requires us to first deduce Bacon's entire philosophical framework, his personal taxonomy of reality, before we can even begin to read a single sentence. We wouldn't just be breaking a code, we would be learning a lost language from scratch with no dictionary or Rosetta Stone to guide us. This monumental challenge may explain why, despite centuries of effort, the core of Bacon's mystery remains intact, protecting not just what he knew, but how he thought. Just when the mystery of Roger Bacon's code seems contained within the medieval world, a startling and controversial theory emerges, pulling the puzzle forward by 4 centuries and placing it squarely in the hands of another, far more famous Bacon. This proposition suggests that the 13th century friar was not the true author of these cryptic texts at all, but rather a clever decoy in an elaborate literary hoax masterminded by the Elizabethan philosopher and statesman Sir Francis Bacon. The linchpin of this audacious idea is a specific cryptographic invention credited to Sir Francis, the so-called biliteral cipher. Sir Francis Bacon, a leading figure in the scientific revolution of the 1600s, was a profound advocate for empirical inquiry and the founder of the scientific method. But he was also deeply fascinated by the art of secrecy. In his work De Augmentis Scientiarum, he formally described a steganographic system designed to hide messages in plain sight. His biliteral cipher is a form of what we would now call a binary code, though it predates computers by centuries. The system is elegantly simple in concept. It uses only 2 symbols, which we can represent as A and B. Every letter of the standard alphabet is assigned a unique 5-character sequence of these 2 symbols. For instance, the letter A might be AR, B could be AWAB, and so on. The true genius, however, lies in the method of concealment. Bacon proposed that these sequences of A's and B's could be hidden within an ordinary-looking text by using 2 different typefaces or fonts. One font would represent the A's and a slightly different font would represent the B's. To a casual observer, the page would look like any other piece of writing, but to someone who knew the system and could distinguish the 2 fonts, the secret message could be extracted letter by letter. Proponents of the Francis Bacon theory argue that he saw the perfect opportunity to test and demonstrate his ultimate steganographic method. They claim he, or a secret society he was part of, composed the complex encrypted manuscripts we attribute to Roger Bacon. The motive: to create an unassailable vault for his own most radical ideas, ideas that might have been politically or religiously dangerous in the Elizabethan and Jacobean eras, by hiding them behind the impeccable cover of a revered medieval scholar. By backdating the works by 400 years, any controversial content could be dismissed as the superstitious musings of a bygone age if discovered, while the true, hidden message would remain accessible only to initiates who understood the biliteral cipher. This theory gained significant traction in the 19th and early 20th centuries, particularly among those involved in the fervent debate over the true authorship of Shakespeare's plays. Many Baconians, who believed Sir Francis was the real genius behind the works of Shakespeare, saw the same cryptographic hand at play in the Bacon ciphers, arguing it was all part of a grand pattern of concealed authorship. The arguments for this theory hinge on perceived anachronisms and the sheer sophistication of the encryption. Supporters point to the advanced nature of the scientific concepts supposedly encoded, arguing they align better with the knowledge of the 16th or 17th century than with the 13th. They suggest that the stylistic elements of the manuscripts, particularly the illustrations in texts like the Voynich, bear a closer resemblance to Renaissance art than to medieval illumination. The multi-layered nature of the encryption, they claim, is simply too complex for a medieval mind and perfectly matches the ingenious, methodical intellect of Sir Francis Bacon, a man who literally wrote the book on advanced cryptography. For them, Roger Bacon is a smokescreen, a historical beard allowing a later genius to safely preserve esoteric knowledge, including perhaps his own literary masterpieces for a future time. However, when subjected to rigorous historical and scientific scrutiny, the Francis Bacon theory faces overwhelming challenges. The most definitive evidence against it is, once again, radiocarbon dating. As we've seen, testing on the vellum of key manuscripts like the Voynich firmly places their creation in the early 15th century, around 1404 to 1438. This is 200 years after Roger Bacon's death, but also a full century before Sir Francis Bacon was even born. While it's theoretically possible that a later forger could have used old vellum, the consistency of the date with the script, ink, and artistic style makes it highly probable that the manuscript is a genuine product of the early 1400s. Furthermore, the biliteral cipher relies on the use of two distinct fonts, a technology that simply did not exist in the era of handwritten manuscripts. Every character in a medieval manuscript is unique, written by a human hand. There is no standardized font in which to hide a binary code. The theory requires a technological anachronism that fundamentally doesn't fit the physical evidence. Ultimately, the persistence of the Francis Bacon theory reveals more about our own fascination with conspiracy and interconnected mysteries than it does about the historical record. It's a compelling narrative that ties up two great Baconian enigmas with a single, elegant solution. But the evidence firmly re-anchors the ciphers to the medieval world of Roger Bacon. The theory's failure, however, serves to highlight the extraordinary nature of the original achievement. It demonstrates that the cryptographic techniques employed in the 13th and 14th centuries were so advanced that they could be plausibly mistaken for the work of a scientific genius from the age of Shakespeare. This realization forces us to re-evaluate Roger Bacon not as a primitive precursor to modern science, but as a pioneering cryptographer whose methods were, in their own right, centuries ahead of their time. The mystery remains his, a testament to a mind that sought to protect its visionary ideas with a sophistication that would bewilder experts for generations to come. Now let us turn from theories and examine the physical evidence itself, the ancient pages where Roger Bacon's cryptic handiwork survives. Among the most significant of these documents is a short but explosive treatise known as the Epistola de Secretis Operibus Artis et Naturae, which translates to the letter on the secret works of art and nature. This manuscript is a prime example of Bacon's approach, a work that on its surface is a letter of advice to a powerful figure, but which many believe contains layers of hidden meaning. Its journey through time is a story in itself. Today, one of the most important copies resides under carefully controlled conditions in the British Library in London, a treasure shelved among other medieval codices, its vellum pages bearing the faint scent of centuries. Its provenance or history of ownership can be traced back through the libraries of various European collectors and monastic institutions, a chain of custody that speaks to its enduring value and mystery. The content of the Epistola is what makes it so fascinating. In plain Latin, Bacon discusses the potential for human ingenuity to create marvels that would seem like magic to the uninitiated. He writes openly about gunpowder, describing its explosive power in a formula that is one of the earliest known in Christendom. He speculates about mechanical wonders like self-propelled ships and vehicles, and even the possibility of constructing bridges that span great rivers without pillars. But it is in the more theoretical passages that scholars detect the whispers of cipher. When Bacon delves into the deepest secrets of nature, his language becomes unusually dense and convoluted. He employs atypical abbreviations, suddenly shifts to using Greek letters within the Latin text, and constructs sentences that are grammatically strange and difficult to parse. A passage might begin as a straightforward philosophical point, then veer into a thicket of odd syntax and rare symbols that feels deliberately obstructive. For instance, in a section discussing the prolongation of human life, the text becomes particularly tangled. Words are broken up in unnatural places, and certain key terms are represented not by their standard Latin forms, but by unique symbols that resemble astrological signs. To a casual reader, it might simply look like a clumsy or highly idiosyncratic writing style, but to a cryptographer, these irregularities are red flags. They are the hallmarks of a text that has been encoded, where the true message has been disguised by altering the surface-level structure of the language. The challenge is determining whether this is a simple cipher waiting for a key, or a more complex form of steganography where the hidden message is woven into the very grammar of the overt text. Is the discussion of life extension just a philosophical musing, or is the formula for the legendary elixir of life concealed within the jumbled syntax of the paragraph itself? Another manuscript of immense importance is Bacon's Secretum Secretorum, a commentary on a popular medieval text of Arabic origin that was itself a collection of advice on everything from statecraft to medicine. Bacon's version, however, is far more than a simple translation or gloss. Scattered throughout the margins and embedded within the main body of the text are diagrams and passages that have resisted clear interpretation for centuries. One famous folio contains a complex circular diagram filled with what appear to be alchemical symbols arranged in concentric rings. At first glance, it looks like a standard medieval schematic of the cosmos, but upon closer inspection, the symbols do not correspond to any known planetary or zodiacal system. Instead, they seem to be a unique visual language, a cipher expressed through imagery rather than letters. The text accompanying this diagram is even more baffling. It uses a mixture of standard Latin characters and a set of about 20 invented symbols. These aren't random squiggles, they are carefully drawn, consistent characters that appear multiple times throughout the passage. This is precisely the kind of cipher alphabet that has driven cryptanalysts to distraction. Scholars have attempted to match these symbols to Latin letters based on frequency analysis, but the results are often nonsensical. This failure suggests that Bacon may have been using a more sophisticated system, perhaps one where the symbols represent syllables or even whole concepts, as in the philosophical language theory. The Secretum Secretorum manuscript, therefore, presents a double puzzle, a visual code in its diagrams and a linguistic code in its text, each potentially holding a piece of Bacon's greatest secrets, and each daring the viewer to look deeper. Holding a high-resolution digital copy of this page today, one can almost feel the presence of the friar's mind, challenging us across the centuries to understand the full scope of his vision. While the full contents of Roger Bacon's ciphers may remain locked away, their very existence sent ripples through the centuries that would fundamentally shape the future of secret communication. His work did not vanish into the silence of monastic libraries. Instead, it became a hidden seed, germinating in the minds of later scholars who recognized the power and necessity of concealing knowledge. The most direct line of this influence can be traced to a man who could be considered Bacon's spiritual successor in the art of secrecy, Johannes Trithemius, the enigmatic abbot of Sponheim. Living 2 centuries after Bacon in the late 1400s, Trithemius was a renowned scholar and occultist who authored some of the most important early works on cryptography. In his monumental book, Steganographia, a title meaning hidden writing, Trithemius explored methods far beyond simple substitution ciphers. He described complex systems involving celestial tables and angelic names, where the true message was disguised within what appeared to be invocations to spirits. The connection to Bacon is profound. Trithemius was operating in a world still deeply suspicious of magical practices, and like Bacon, he understood that advanced knowledge required protection. His Steganographia was so controversial that it was widely condemned as a book of black magic, and for centuries scholars missed its true cryptographic genius. They failed to see that the angelic names and astrological timings were not meant to summon demons, but were themselves a sophisticated cipher system, a direct echo of Bacon's multi-layered approach to misdirection and concealment. Trithemius had learned the essential lesson from the Baconian tradition. The best way to hide a secret is to place it within a container that most people will dismiss as either nonsense or heresy, thereby deterring the very individuals who would seek to suppress it. He expanded on Bacon's ideas, systematizing them into a more formal art of steganography, and in doing so, he passed the torch of cryptographic innovation to the Renaissance. This torch was then carried forward by figures like the Italian polymath Giovanni Battista della Porta in the 16th century. Della Porta was a true Renaissance man, a founder of scientific societies and a pioneering researcher in optics and magnetism, yet he also devoted significant energy to the study of codes. His book, De Furtivis Literarum Notis, or On the Secret Notations of Letters, is a landmark in cryptographic history. In it, Della Porta catalogued an astonishing array of cipher techniques, from invisible inks made from fruit juices to complex polyalphabetic ciphers that used multiple alphabets to scramble a message. He even described an early form of the cipher disk, a device that would become a standard tool for centuries. Della Porta's work represents the codification and professionalization of ideas that Bacon had pioneered in a more ad hoc defensive manner. Where Bacon used nulls and invented symbols to protect his own thoughts, Della Porta analyzed these methods, categorized them, and explained their strengths and weaknesses for a wider audience of diplomats, soldiers, and scientists. He stood on the shoulders of a tradition that included Trithemius, and by extension, Roger Bacon, transforming the friar's practical necessity into a formal branch of knowledge. This established a clear lineage from Bacon's desperate ingenuity to Trithemius's mystical systematization to Della Porta's encyclopedic explication. This progression shows Bacon not as an isolated genius, but as a foundational source, the original wellspring for a river of cryptographic thought that would eventually flow into the modern era. The ultimate impact of this lineage was to elevate cryptography from a mere craft of spies into a legitimate intellectual discipline. Before Bacon, secret writing was often simplistic, little more than a tool for basic deception. But the sheer sophistication of his methods and the legendary status they acquired demonstrated that encryption could be a profound intellectual challenge, worthy of the finest scholarly minds. He set a precedent that attracted thinkers like John Dee and later Blaise de Vigenère, who developed the famous Vigenère cipher that was considered unbreakable for centuries. Each of these figures, in their own way, was responding to the standard set by that 13th century Franciscan, that truly important ideas deserve the most formidable protection, and that the art of concealment is itself a noble and complex science. Bacon's greatest contribution, therefore, may not be a single deciphered formula, but the very framework he helped establish for protecting sensitive information, a framework that would become indispensable in an increasingly complex and politically fraught world. The allure of an unsolved 700-year-old mystery is a flame that modern storytellers cannot resist, and Roger Bacon has been enthusiastically claimed by popular culture as the archetype of the wise, secretive wizard. His historical persona, already blurred with legend, provides the perfect raw material for fictional narratives that crave a sense of ancient, esoteric truth. Perhaps the most intellectually fitting tribute comes from the Italian semiotician and novelist Umberto Eco in his celebrated masterpiece, The Name of the Rose. Set in a 14th-century Italian monastery, the novel is a labyrinthine murder mystery centered on a forbidden library and a lost book, the second book of Aristotle's Poetics on Comedy. While the story's central detective is the Franciscan William of Baskerville, a character deliberately modeled on the logical prowess of Sherlock Holmes, his intellectual and philosophical DNA is pure Roger Bacon. William embodies Bacon's core principles, He relies on empirical observation, the use of optical lenses like eyeglasses, and a relentless, almost scientific curiosity to solve the crimes. He is a walking testament to Bacon's belief in experimental science, operating within a world suffocated by dogmatic fear. Eco doesn't need to name Bacon directly. His spirit is the invisible protagonist, the ghost in the library whose methods are the only key to uncovering the truth hidden behind walls of superstition and murderous zeal. This portrayal taps directly into one of the most persistent modern interpretations of Bacon, the enlightened man crushed by an oppressive institution. This narrative of the brave intellectual standing against the forces of ignorance has tremendous resonance, casting Bacon as a tragic hero of science. We see this theme amplified in other media, such as the television series The Librarians, where Bacon appears as a recurring character, an immortal, powerful wizard who was one of the original guardians of magical artifacts. Here, the historical figure is completely transformed into a fantasy archetype, but the core idea remains. He is the keeper of dangerous knowledge, a man whose understanding of the world is so advanced it borders on the supernatural. This version leans into the Doctor Mirabilis legend, taking the medieval rumors of his magical prowess and making them literal. It's a simplification, of course, but it speaks to a fundamental public perception that Roger Bacon's real-world intellect was so extraordinary that it might as well be magic. The world of video games, with its inherent love for puzzles and hidden lore, has also found a natural home for the Baconian mythos. Games like the Assassin's Creed series, which weave historical figures into a grand science fiction tapestry about secret wars throughout history, have referenced Bacon as part of their complex backstory. In these interactive worlds, his ciphers are not just academic curiosities. They become active gameplay elements, literal codes that the player must break to unlock new abilities or pieces of the narrative. This transforms the audience from passive observers into active participants in the decryption process, allowing them to feel a fraction of the frustration and triumph that real-world cryptanalysts experience. Similarly, role-playing games often feature ancient tomes or grimoires attributed to Bacon, their pages filled with in-game spells or technological blueprints that grant the player character power. This usage reinforces the idea that Bacon's encrypted texts are not merely historical documents but functional containers of potent, game-changing knowledge. What is truly fascinating about Bacon's cultural afterlife is the consistent set of traits that writers and developers latch onto, regardless of the genre. He is almost never portrayed as a simple monk or a conventional scholar. Instead, he is the hidden master, the founder of a secret society, the man who knew too much. He is a symbol of forbidden science, a bridge between the rational and the occult. This cultural shorthand works because the actual facts of his life, his advocacy for experimental methods, his conflicts with authority, and his impenetrable ciphers provide a sturdy foundation upon which endless fictional layers can be built. The real mystery of his work grants any story that features him an instant aura of authenticity and depth. By simply invoking his name, a creator can suggest that their fictional world has hidden depths, with secrets buried in history just waiting to be uncovered. This process of myth-making, while often departing from historical accuracy, serves an important purpose. It keeps the name and the legend of Roger Bacon alive in the public consciousness. For every person who encounters him as a wizard in a fantasy novel or a puzzle giver in a video game, a few may be sparked with a curiosity to learn about the real 13th century friar. The pop culture icon becomes a gateway to the historical figure. The exaggerated tales of magic and immortality, in their own strange way, honor the essence of the real Bacon's legacy, a relentless, revolutionary, and seemingly magical pursuit of knowledge against all odds. He has become a permanent fixture in our modern mythology, a testament to the enduring power of a secret and the human obsession with the brilliant mind that dared to encode it. The quest to unlock Roger Bacon's secrets has not faded into the quiet halls of academia. Instead, it has found a vibrant and bustling new home in the digital age. Today, the solitary scholar hunched over a parchment has been joined by thousands of amateur sleuths from around the globe, connected by a shared obsession and the power of the internet. Online forums, sprawling wikis, and dedicated social media groups have become the modern scriptoriums where this 700-year-old puzzle is being attacked with unprecedented collaborative energy. In these virtual spaces, a high school teacher from Ohio can compare notes with a software engineer from Tokyo, a retired librarian from Wales, and a history student from Brazil, all united by a single goal: to be the one who finally cracks the code. This democratization of cryptanalysis has transformed the search from a niche academic pursuit into a worldwide, crowdsourced intellectual adventure. What drives this passionate community is a powerful mix of motives. For some, it is the pure intellectual thrill of the puzzle itself, a challenge that has defied some of history's greatest minds. There is a certain glory in attempting to solve a problem that baffled a genius like John Dee. For others, it is the powerful allure of the potential reward, not a monetary prize, but the profound historical and philosophical discovery that a successful decipherment would represent. The possibility that these manuscripts contain lost scientific insights or heretical prophecies provides a narrative drive that a mere abstract puzzle could never muster. And for many, it is simply the sense of community and shared purpose, the feeling of being part of a centuries-long conversation with one of the most fascinating figures in history. They are not just solving a cipher, they are communing with the ghost of Roger Bacon, trying to understand the mind of a man who felt his ideas were too dangerous for his own time. The tools and methods employed by these online communities are remarkably sophisticated. While they may lack formal training in paleography or medieval Latin, they bring a diverse and powerful set of skills to the table. Computer programmers write scripts to run complex statistical analyses on digital transcriptions of the texts, searching for patterns invisible to the human eye. Mathematicians apply graph theory to the relationships between symbols. Linguists contribute their knowledge of language structures, while artists with a keen eye for detail meticulously compare the shapes of individual characters across different manuscripts, looking for subtle consistencies or variations that might hold the key. The collaborative environment means that a new theory proposed one day can be stress-tested by dozens of people within hours, its weaknesses exposed and its strengths refined in a rapid, iterative process that would have been unimaginable just a few decades ago. Yet, for every promising new angle, there are countless blind alleys and heated debates. A common cycle unfolds on these forums. A user will present a eureka moment, a new decipherment key that seems to produce coherent phrases from a short passage. The community will buzz with excitement, applying the proposed key to other sections of the text. But almost invariably, the system breaks down. The same key that produced perfect Latin on one page generates gibberish on the next, a telltale sign that the solution is not universal. These failures, however, are not seen as defeats. Each proposed solution, even a flawed one, adds another piece to the collective understanding. It helps the community rule out certain approaches, narrowing the infinite field of possibilities. The discussions that follow are a fascinating blend of supportive encouragement and rigorous, sometimes brutally honest peer review, creating a self-correcting system that mirrors the scientific method Bacon himself championed. This dynamic ensures that the mystery of Roger Bacon's ciphers remains as potent and frustrating today as it was in the 16th century. The internet has not provided a shortcut to the answer. It has simply allowed more people to experience the full depth of the challenge. The enduring power of this puzzle lies in its perfect balance of accessibility and impenetrability. The manuscripts are, for the most part, freely available online for anyone to study. The barrier to entry is low. Anyone with curiosity can join the hunt. but the barrier to success remains monumentally high, a fortress of logic that has repelled every assault. This combination is what keeps the community engaged year after year. There is always a new theory to discuss, a fresh pair of eyes to look at an old problem, and the ever-present, tantalizing hope that the next post, the next idea, might be the one that changes history. The search for Roger Bacon's secrets is no longer just a historical inquiry. It is a living, breathing testament to the timeless human drive to solve a mystery, to understand a brilliant mind, and to uncover a truth that has been waiting centuries to be told. After centuries of brilliant minds and more recently, immense computational power have been directed at this puzzle, its enduring resistance forces us to ask a humbling question. What if the obstacles are not just difficult but fundamental? The continued silence of Bacon's code suggests we may be facing barriers that are built into the very nature of the encryption, problems that no amount of effort can easily overcome. One of the most daunting possibilities is the simple, tragic reality of history. The key may be permanently lost. Unlike modern encryption, which relies on mathematical principles that can be rediscovered, Bacon's system could have been built around a specific, physical key text known only to him and his intended recipient. Imagine he agreed with Pope Clement IV to use a particular edition of a specific book, perhaps a certain version of the Bible or a work by Aristotle, as the codebook. The hidden messages in his manuscripts would then consist of sequences of numbers, a page number, a line number, a word number. To anyone else, these numbers would be meaningless gibberish. But with the correct book in hand, the Pope could effortlessly pluck the designated words and reconstruct the secret message. If that unique key text was destroyed in a fire, lost to war, or simply crumbled into dust over the last 700 years, the cipher becomes truly unbreakable. The message is not just locked, the only key that ever existed has vanished from time itself. Beyond the loss of a physical key, we must confront an even more profound challenge, the personal nature of the code. What if the encryption system was not a standardized cipher, but a unique language of Bacon's own creation, shaped by the idiosyncrasies of his mind? We all have personal mental shortcuts and associations. A certain smell might instantly recall a childhood memory. A specific number might hold a private significance. Bacon could have built his encryption around a similar framework of personal symbolism. A particular squiggle might not just mean water, but might specifically call to mind a stream he saw near Oxford, which he associated with a philosophical concept about the flow of time. Without access to his diaries, his private thoughts, and the vast landscape of his personal experiences, we are trying to decode a deeply personal language with only a public dictionary. Modern code breaking excels against systems of pure logic, but it stumbles when faced with the unpredictable contours of a single human consciousness. The code in this scenario is not just a lockbox, it is an extension of Bacon's own brain, and without being able to think exactly as he did, we may simply lack the necessary context to ever understand it. This leads to the third, and perhaps most mind-bending possibility, that we are fundamentally misunderstanding the nature of the text we are trying to decipher. For centuries, the assumption has been that we are looking at a cipher, a one-to-one transformation where a strange symbol corresponds to a standard Latin letter. But what if the truth is far stranger? What if the text is not a cipher at all, but an example of a constructed philosophical language, as some theorists suggest? In this system, each unique symbol doesn't represent a letter, but an entire concept or a fundamental building block of reality. A symbol shaped like a leaf might fundamentally mean growth or botany. Combining it with a symbol for light might create a new word meaning photosynthesis. If this is the case, then we are not trying to break a code, we are trying to learn an entire language from scratch with no Rosetta Stone and no native speakers to guide us. Our failure would not be a lack of cleverness but a categorical error. We have been trying to pick a lock that was never there because we failed to realize the door itself is written in a tongue we do not speak. The true secret of Roger Bacon may not be a specific fact he hid, but an entire way of thinking about the universe encoded in a grammar we have yet to discover. And so we arrive at the final, enduring paradox of Roger Bacon. For 7 centuries, his ciphers have stood as a silent challenge, a monument perched precisely on the boundary between the known and the unknown. We have traced the arc of a mind so brilliant it perceived the contours of flying machines and microscopes in an age of candlelight, yet so constrained by the fears of his time that he felt compelled to bury his most profound insights beneath layers of impenetrable code. This is the central tension of his legacy, a fierce advocate for open, experimental science who became history's most famous prisoner of secrecy. His story is not merely one of a clever puzzle, but a powerful and poignant drama about the peril and promise of knowledge itself. The true legacy of this enigma, then, may not be a specific deciphered formula or a prophetic prediction. Rather, it is the very act of questioning that his work inspires. The unresolved nature of the ciphers forces us to confront fundamental questions about the history of ideas. How many other revolutionary thoughts have been lost to time, suppressed by authority, or hidden away by their creators out of fear? Bacon's encrypted manuscripts are a stark reminder that the smooth narrative of scientific progress we often learn is, in reality, a story full of detours, dead ends, and silenced voices. His codes are a ghostly presence in the history of science, a whisper of a path not taken, a timeline of discovery that was deliberately paused. They challenge our arrogance, suggesting that what we consider modern breakthroughs may have had secret precursors, their blueprints locked away in a forgotten language. In the end, the ciphers of Roger Bacon have transcended their original purpose. They have become a mirror, reflecting back the obsessions of every generation that has tried to break them. The medieval monk saw a key to theological secrets. The Renaissance magus like John Dee saw a map to angelic realms and the philosopher's stone. The modern scientist hopes for lost equations and precocious inventions. Our continued fascination proves that the allure of the secret is a permanent part of the human spirit. We are drawn to the locked box, the unread page, the whispered rumor of a truth too potent for the world. Bacon understood this drive intimately, and he weaponized it, creating a mystery so compelling that it would guarantee the survival of his name and the core of his mission long after his mortal fears had turned to dust. So, while the pages may remain silent, the message of Roger Bacon's life echoes clearly across the centuries. It is a message about the courage to question, the necessity of curiosity, and the eternal struggle between the freedom of inquiry and the power of dogma. His ciphers stand not as a failure of code-breaking, but as a roaring success of communication. They communicate the immense value he placed on his ideas, the dangerous world in which he lived, and his profound hope that a future generation, wiser and more prepared, would eventually come to seek them out. The code remains unbroken, but the conversation it started is one we are still having today, a testament to one man's desperate, brilliant attempt to send a message through time. Now, after this deep exploration, the question ultimately falls to us, the curious audience of the present day. What incredible truths do you believe are concealed within Roger Bacon's cryptic scripts? The possibilities are as vast as the medieval imagination itself. Do his ciphers guard the precise chemical formula for the Philosopher's Stone, a secret that would have rewritten the very foundations of economy and power? Or do they contain prophetic astronomical charts, mapping out events he foresaw centuries in advance? Perhaps the real treasure is not a single discovery, but the complete blueprint for his universal language, a system of thought designed to eliminate human misunderstanding forever. Your perspective is a vital part of this ongoing investigation. We invite you to share your most intriguing theories and personal insights in the comments below. What hidden knowledge captures your imagination the most? The collective curiosity of this community is a powerful tool, and a fresh pair of eyes might just see a pattern that everyone else has missed. So tell us, what do you think the wonderful teacher was so desperate to protect? I am genuinely eager to read your ideas. If this journey into the heart of a 700-year-old enigma has sparked your sense of wonder, if you've enjoyed unraveling the layers of history, secrecy, and genius, then please show your support by liking this video. It helps this channel continue to bring you deep dives into the world's greatest mysteries. And for more adventures into the forgotten corners of history, from lost civilizations to unsolved codes, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an exploration. The quest to understand Roger Bacon is far from over. It continues in university libraries, in the digital forums of dedicated amateurs, and now right here. The next great breakthrough, the key that finally unlocks the cipher, may not come from a renowned professor or a powerful computer. It could very well come from one of you watching this right now, who looks at the puzzle from a new angle and sees the truth that has been waiting in plain sight for centuries. The code remains, the mystery endures, and the search for answers is a story that we are all still writing together.